Thank you, everybody, for being here. For those of you who I don't know, I'm Sandro Galea. I have the privilege of serving as Dean of the School of Public Health at Boston University. This is part of our series of Dean seminars on contemporary issues in public health. And we thought there was no issue more contemporary than the elections that are hitting us right now. Dean Harold Cox, who is our Dean of Practice, is the mastermind behind these events, and he's going to tell us a little bit about today. Harold.
Good afternoon, everybody. So the biggest show on earth right now, obviously, is the election. And I'm very glad to have with us experts who are going to help us to unpack what's going on. Let me first tell you about a couple of events that you may want to be aware of. We will be sending out information into your mailboxes about two events. One is the Mother's Day Peace March. You'll recall that one of our earlier speakers was Tina Sherry, who is with the Peace Institute. And this is a march looking at issues around guns and gun violence. That'll be on May 8th. So look for that in your box. And for those of you who'd like to participate, we'd love to have a wonderful team. The second is, and there is an opportunity for you to also provide some funding, if you wish, for individuals who have been impacted by the earthquake in Ecuador. We have all been hearing information about the now more than 400 individuals who have died, the many more individuals who are missing, and the devastation that's happening in that country. So we will provide information to you about ways that you can contribute to that activity. We have a couple of students from Ecuador who we've been in contact with, whose families were not directly impacted, but certainly indirectly impacted, and our thoughts certainly go out to them. Today, we're very happy to have four individuals who are on the front line of talking about the election. We have Mayor Annise Parker from Houston, Texas, and you, of course, know that makes me particularly happy because we have a Texan in the house. We have Mayor Karl Dean, we have from Nashville, Tennessee, and we also have Mayor Scott Smith, who is from Mesa, Arizona. Each of these mayors are now former mayors, each of them serving between 6 and 8 years in their term. And when I asked them what were the things that they were most proud of in that community, Mayor Parker says that she was most proud of the fact that Houston has been tackling homelessness and the infrastructure issues. Mayor Dean says that he's most proud of the fact that Nashville has seen tremendous amount of growth in the last 5 years. And Mayor Smith says that even though his city is perhaps one of the most conservative cities in the country, his city has been identified as being one of the most innovative communities in the country. Indeed, these are all things that each of them can be very proud of. The thing that I've learned about our mayors is that they are dynamic, they are forward-thinking, and there's at least at one point in their life that they have been identified as being a troublemaker. We are glad that they are here. And before I turn this over to Lylah Alphonse, who is going to be our moderator, Lylah is the managing editor for news at U.S. News, World, and Report, and is responsible for overseeing the newsroom and will be our moderator. I want to tell you about the poll that we took. So, we did this mock election, and there were about 900 plus people who participated in it, and here are the results. Ted Cruz, 14. Kasich is absolute. Kasich, 51. Trump, 66. Sanders, 372. Clinton, 404. Thanks for participating in it. Lylah.
Thank you for having me. Those results are pretty striking, and I think they really illustrate how crazy this election cycle has been. We started out with one of the largest Republican fields in history with 17 candidates. It's been winnowed down to 3, none of whom anyone was taking seriously just 6 months ago. On the Democratic side, we have a front-runner who was presumed to just sail right into the White House, and instead she's facing some pretty stiff competition. We've heard about building walls, we've heard about busting Wall Street, we've heard about universal health care, we've heard about universal college, we've heard about minimum wage and maximum campaign contributions. But I'm curious what you think are the main issues that we're not hearing about, the things that really affect our day-to-day lives. Mayor Parker, let's start with you.
Well, in the introduction that I was given, I mentioned infrastructure, and I would venture that all of us up here have focused on infrastructure in our cities because infrastructure is the platform on which you build your life. And infrastructure is not just roads and bridges, which are crumbling all across America, but infrastructure is also water plants and sewage treatment plants and airports and even the internet. It's all part of infrastructure, and we need a massive overhaul of America's infrastructure. No one's talking about that. Now, I'm in live in a border state, and immigration is hugely important to Texas. Oddly enough, all of the big cities in Texas have Democratic majorities. We're blue islands in the Red Sea, but my policy on immigration and Rick Perry's policy on immigration were the same. We're very pragmatic, but we want a solution. We want Washington, and there's rhetoric, walls. That's not a solution, and we need to move to that. And then finally, a lot of conversations about it shouldn't be about Wall Street. It should be about income inequality and access to opportunity in America.
Mayor Smith, how about you?
And I think that the mayor it's not that they're not being talked about, it's the way they're being talked about. You know, we used to talk about, back in the Lincoln-Douglas debates, I mean, those, sometimes they'd go on for an hour and a half uninterrupted and trying to present their point. Then we evolved into what's called the 15-second soundbite, and we've moved way past that. We're now in a Twitter world, and it seems like positions on very complex issues have to be stated in 140 characters or less, whether it be immigration, whether it be infrastructure, which I agree no one's talking about. And if you look at the great things that have made America different over the history, whether it be the Erie Canal or the Transcontinental Railroad or the interstate highway system, it was an investment in great things. The freedoms that we enjoyed, the liberty, and the education, the universal education, and the investment in things that were never partisan issues. They were always bipartisan issues, and we're barely talking about those things. And why we talk about them, it's in a Twitter universe. And so, immigration is reduced to build the wall. Oh, I forgot. The second Twitter is make Mexico pay for it. Being in Arizona, like Texas. You know that it doesn't even begin to define the problem, much less, or define the issue, much less have a solution. So I think I'm more worried about the fact that when things are talked about, they're brushed over, they're sensationalized, and they're reduced to less than a tagline.
Mayor Dean?
Well, I would agree with my colleagues. I think, number one, infrastructure is absolutely essential. And for me, I think transportation is an area where the federal government plays such a key role. And transportation, in terms of mass transit, requires the federal government to be ready and able to assist and provide leadership on that issue. So I hope that becomes something that the next president focuses on. I also believe that it's important for a city. I think a city has to have enough confidence to invest in itself, and so does a country. So investing in infrastructure, investing in the future is what a country should do. Immigration, is something, and diversity is something that makes our country strong. It has certainly made my city of Nashville much stronger, and it is all over the country. This country is changing. And so I think talking about demographic change and talking about immigration, it should be a positive thing. And this campaign, of course, has been almost totally negative. I mean, you can't point to a city that is succeeding and point to a city that doesn't have immigration. When you think about immigration, it means this. It means that people who come to this country, and it's like Southwest Airlines says, you're free to move about the country. And they pick your city as a place to raise their family, to live their dreams, to seize opportunity. That's the biggest compliment anybody could give your city. So that tone needs to change. And then I think education is something that the country's made progress on. It's, we go and, but I think education, how we fund, how we make sure kids can go to college and university, how we keep increasing the quality is a long-term investment in our country.
Okay, now, in the U.S. Conference of Mayors, we have a phrase, if mayors rule the world. Here's why. Mayors are pragmatic and focused on getting things done.
I think, unlike the people at the top of the ticket, where they're talking about things in theory, at the city level, at the mayor level, you're really forced to face the issues and look at them in terms of how they affect people's day-to-day lives. Some of the things that we're seeing or hearing about during debates as talking points, some of them are public health issues. We're hearing a lot about the opioid epidemic. We're hearing a lot about gun legislation, and we're hearing a lot about the ACA. They're going to dismantle the ACA, they're going to expand the ACA, and they're going to replace it with something better, somehow specifics to come later. Where do you see these public health issues at the city level? What kind of impact are they having on the people with whom you interact day to day?
I think they have an extensive impact. And the other issue I would throw in for health is obesity and just the health of our citizens. That we have certainly coming from the South, that that's a major issue in most southern states. And the kids in Nashville, probably 36% are obese, and which leads to long-term health consequences. So I think that should be an issue that's out there. Drugs, opiates now, is a constant issue, and I think you're seeing it spread across the country. I think it's getting to different parts of the country a little bit later, but it's a major issue now, I'd say, in Tennessee too, that needs to be addressed. For me, the Affordable Care Act, my state has not expanded Medicaid. We have not gotten the full benefit of that, but obviously we do have citizens who are covered by the act, and that's been a great thing for our city. I mean, as mayor, you want your citizens to have health insurance. And I think that hopefully what will happen in Tennessee is that at some point we will expand our Medicaid coverage, but we're losing money. I mean, we're getting money that's being spent in other states because we're not willing to accept it.
I come from, I'm a CPA and attorney by training, but I got into the home building development business. And you learn a couple things in real estate development. One of them is, as they say, the old adage, what does it take to be a plumber? You paydays on Friday and you know what runs downhill. In the political world, cities are at the low end of the gravitational flow of the challenges and issues of our society. When you have opiates, when you have homeless, when you have veterans who have mental health issues, at the national level, they can debate the problems of the VA health care system ad nauseum, and they do. At the state level, legislators debate what they're going to do on a certain thing ad nauseum, and they do. And mayors deal with the impact. We deal with the vet who is homeless, probably homeless because he or she has mental health issues, maybe has a dependency issue, and they show up on our streets. And so cities deal with those issues. And we're ill-equipped to deal with them because the political debates upstream really aren't about solving problems. They're about proving an ideology, winning a debate, whatever it is. For example, talk about the homeless vet. We have a men's shelter that's in Mesa that's funded partially by community development block grants. And in Congress, especially the Republicans, and I am a Republican, so it frustrates me that they want to completely cut that out. Let me tell you what happens when we have a homeless vet, who I believe the federal government has a responsibility to take care of those who have served our country and have served in the military. When we pick them up, usually it's picked up by a police officer or a firefighter on the street. Someone calls in and they said, this person is scary, so they go pick them up. Well, they can either take them to this, they have three choices. They can either take them to jail, that doesn't solve anything, except for it costs money. They can take them to the hospital, and then when you take someone you pick up off the street to an emergency room, that police officer or firefighter has to stay there until that person is either admitted or walks away. Sometimes that's an entire shift. Or we take them to this men's shelter that is staffed with professionals that can identify and hopefully get them into a system that helps them work. So which one is the federal government trying to cut off? Of course, the one that makes the most sense. Those are issues we deal with in the cities all the time. And we can't avoid those. You can't ignore the challenges that you have, whether it be public health, a specific public health or immigration or something. The cities are where things happen, which is why you find the cities, and whether it be Democrat, Republican, where solutions are actually discussed and solutions are actually implemented. It's why there's innovation at the city level, because we can't avoid those problems and those issues. And I think that long term, real solutions will not be the ACA. The ACA is an insurance program. It's not a health delivery program. What you're finding is that innovation is happening in places like here at Boston University, in the city of Boston, the city of Houston, because we're having to deal with the true impacts. I think you'll see in our metro areas is where innovation and where real solutions will happen, not at the state capitol and not at the national capitol. That's the interesting dynamic. It doesn't matter what rhetoric you hear from these presidents. How many of you truly believe that the most rhetorical, and I know you'd love to have completely free college education, what are the odds of, if Bernie Sanders is elected president, of that ever happening? Not going to happen. What are the odds of the things Donald Trump's throwing out ever happening? Not going to happen. So we obsess over the rhetoric that happens, and the reality is that those things will never see the light of day because they're not based on reality. What you'll see is mayors and municipalities that are dealing with these problems every single day, and that's where the real innovation and that's where the problem solving will happen. And other than that, I have no strong feelings on the issue.
Mayor Parker, what do you think?
Kind of stop there. You did a good job of articulating the mic drop. It is. I would say that legislators choose issues. Issues choose us. And we have to deal with what's in front of us. So very similar to what Scott said, that if you have a homeless person, I'm going to stop there. If you have John on the street in Houston, in the state capitol in Austin, it's a check mark on how many homeless you have. But to us, it's John on the street, and we have to do something with him. But not all of our cities are experiencing the same things at the same time. I wouldn't say that opioid abuse is the biggest drug problem in Houston. It's actually so-called synthetic marijuana or
You call it potpourri.
Potpourri, Kush, Spike. What it is plant products that have been steeped in toxic chemicals. And the reason that it's really bad to call it synthetic marijuana, someone smokes pot, they get sleepy. Someone smokes Kush or potpourri, they could tear all their clothes off and run screaming down the middle of the highway, happened in Houston, or they can go nuts and eat somebody's face, also has happened. And it is very, very cheap, and because it is so cheap, it is and legally sold, not for human consumption, but legally sold, that it is becoming an epidemic among high school students. And so there's always something new out there to be worried about. But let me stop there. I think Scott did a really great job of talking about how it works.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the Affordable Care Act, more commonly known as Obamacare, and how each candidate seems to have their own plan for what's going to happen with it. What decisions are made by the next president? How will that affect you at the city level when it comes to the Affordable Care Act in particular?
Well, Texas also did not expand Medicare, so we have coverage for the very poor, and we have coverage for those who are employed and have to have insurance under the act, and then we have a lot of swaths of modest income Americans who have no coverage. But it is true, the Affordable Care Act is an insurance program. It's not really about health care. It is about how we pay for it, the delivery mechanism. And it was a step forward, but it's not the final solution. And it is a cumbersome bureaucratic mess. And I worked really hard to implement it as mayor, and we would like to see the expansion of Medicare. We want to make sure that there are no gaps. Houston, probably the second biggest industry in Houston after oil and gas is medicine, the Texas Medical Center. And yet, when we started down this path of the ACA, 1 in 4 Houstonians had no health coverage. It is something that deserves real conversation, just as immigration does, but I don't have a lot of faith that it's going to happen. And we're going to be left at the local level trying to pick up some very expensive pieces.
You had a very, Mayor Smith had a very interesting initiative that kind of dealt with the healthcare as a health insurance versus healthcare delivery. Can you tell us a little bit more about what you were doing with that?
Yeah, thank you. I think one of the challenges with the ACA is that since it is an insurance, the discussion doesn't go beyond that and doesn't get into true healthcare delivery, which is a real problem. Now, actually, most of you may not realize, but we do have universal healthcare delivery in this country. Did you realize that? Did they teach you that? Probably not. Because most people are unaware that every citizen in this country has instant health care services to them. It's called 911. And as cities, you deal with that. What happens is that large group that is either uninsured, underinsured, or uneducated, whenever there is a problem health-wise, whether it be a life-threatening or whether grandma can't breathe, or even if somebody sprains their ankle, what they do is they pick up the phone and they dial 911, and then our cities usually send out a very expensive piece of equipment, usually manned by very highly trained firefighters, to go try to deliver health care. In Mesa, Arizona, our fire and medical department, which we finally changed the name, 80% of our calls every year are medically related. In some stations, it's over 90%, primarily in low-income areas. It's over 90% of our firefighters, their calls are medically related. Of those, over 85% are non-health threatening, life-threatening. So they're what I would call basic calls. So you send out paramedics, EMTs, who cannot do anything other than stabilize, triage, and what they end up doing. If it's something that's serious, they end up having to call an ambulance who takes the person to an emergency room, and they sit there in an emergency room, clog up the emergency rooms, and then usually if they're from low income and they don't have insurance, you and I end up eating it because the hospital doesn't collect. That's our healthcare system, right, on the most basic level, and most people really don't realize that in reaching everyone, it is the most inefficient, expensive, it's a ridiculous way to provide healthcare service. What we did in Mesa is we tried to address that by saying, what's our real problem? We got together with hospitals who said, listen, we can't handle all these emergency room clogging up, and we become the primary care physician of the community. Between the Mesa Fire Department and the emergency room at Mountain Vista Hospital, we are now the primary care physician. So we got together and we created these vehicles that are sort of like the ambulances you see. What we have is you have one firefighter who's a paramedic or an EMT, and either a nurse practitioner or a physician's assistant, who usually works for a doctor group that's at the hospital. When the call comes in, we have developed a protocol where I would call it, we triage the call coming in. If it is a life-threatening, if it's an auto accident or something like that, we send the fire engine out. We send the heavy duty. If it is something that is not considered through a series of well-defined triage questions to not be considered life-threatening, we will send this unit out. Now, what happens when this unit arrives on the scene, let's say it's grandma has a hard time breathing. Rather than just having paramedics who can talk to a doctor, but they can't really do anything, they can't provide the kind of medical service, we now have this nurse practitioner or physician's assistant who can actually look at it, what's happening? Now, grandma, when did you quit taking your medicine? Oh, I quit 3 days ago. Oh, okay. Here, they write a prescription. They can actually provide in-house or in-home cover or services. Then what they do is they say, okay, now I want you, who's your doctor? Oh, I don't have one. Well, here's a clinic. I'm going to follow up. We're going to make an appointment for you for next Tuesday. I want to follow up. So they keep them out of the emergency room and put them into a real healthcare delivery system. It's been incredibly successful. The city can't bill for its services. We don't bill. But if there is insurance and they are covered, and a lot of times that's the case, then there's a possibility that there can be some cost recovery. But the hospital isn't worried about being able to bill insurance. What they are is now they've accomplished two things. They have advanced and got grandma into a healthcare delivery system that actually will deal with her issue, and they've kept her out of the emergency room and left the emergency room for true emergencies. And so they've saved a lot of money. Oh, and by the way, and if they can recover costs, they end up ahead. So it's been extremely successful. We moved it from our test stage a couple, 3 years ago into where we're in the middle of, got a big grant from the federal government to conduct a broader test. And you're seeing fire departments in cities around the country who are adopting, if not this exact formula, it's spreading. I think what you'll see is in 5, 10, 15 years, you'll see much more of these mini units. You'll see cities getting involved in trying to reach out and identify and partnering with healthcare, hospital groups, universities, those things. And this is the wave of how we're going to address a small part of the health care delivery, and that is to align our resources with the real problems. You know, when we have clogged emergency rooms, nobody wins in that. Everybody loses. When we have people who aren't getting into the system and going and seeing their doctor, and all they've seen is a firefighter, we pay as a society because that person will not get the care they need. These are some of the innovative things you're seeing where cities are trying to address this problem. We can't solve every problem. This is one example of where we've been very successful in this area of Mesa, Arizona, of changing the way healthcare delivery happens. And the other thing is, it's very difficult to move big fire equipment around from station to station. These, what we call them transitional response vehicles, TRVs. We can move them around, and Mesa has a very active winter visitor population. So there's some areas in our city that double, triple in population.
Winter
during
visitors,
the
that
winter.
like snowbirds? Okay.
I'm trying to be nice. Okay. And there's areas in our city that double and triple in population. What we can do is we can take these TRVs and we can move them around to where the need is, because there's only 2 people involved. And so there's things we're doing to be more nimble and to actually change the way healthcare is delivered, regardless of what happens with the ACA. And frankly, I think, just to get on that very quickly, and as a Republican, I'm disappointed because, you know, the birth of the ACA actually has conservative roots, believe it or not. You know, Ted Cruz can get up and filibuster and read Green Eggs and Ham for 14 hours. And I had a very active Republican make one notice. He says, here's what's wrong with my party and wrong with the discussion. He had 14 hours to offer an alternative. And he read Green Eggs and Ham. And that's the problem with, you talk about the alternative of the ACA. I don't know what the alternative is because no one's talking about an alternative. All they're talking about, keep it or dump it. Right. That is not going to solve our health care or address our health care issues in the United States. It's, okay, keep it, then how do you tweak it if you're a Democrat? Because it's not perfect. Yep. If you're a Republican, you want to get rid of it, fine. What do you want to replace it with? Because there's probably some really good alternatives, and nobody on either side is talking about those.
Mayor Dean, how does the national health care discussion affect you at the city level?
Well, I think this healthcare issue is an interesting one because as mayors, I'm teaching a course now at BU on city policy and things, and you can't look at running a city necessarily in a vacuum. I mean, you have to accept the fact that, as Scott said, in terms of the way our governments work, you know, the federal government regulates things to the state government. Cities are really entirely creatures of state government. We exist by powers granted by the legislature, and the legislature can take those powers away. And there's kind of a trend where that is happening more and more. But there is important urban issues that need to be addressed on a national level. And part of that discussion, I think the Affordable Care Act is part of it. You know, I mentioned we didn't do the Medicare expansion, but it has had a positive effect in Tennessee in that people who didn't have health insurance before now have it, and that is a good thing. And you know, clearly it is not a perfect law, but I would give President Obama a ton of credit for getting it done. You can't have the perfect get in the way of the good. He did something that had been dreamed of in this country since the 1930s. President Truman couldn't do it, President Nixon couldn't do it, and President Obama did it. And there has the resistance to it is fine, but it has, I think it has improved has made it a better country. And we just need to keep working on it. And if there are ways to make it more competitive, better market, better whatever, let's do them. But providing basic medical care is key. And that would go to the immigration issue then. I think we are all probably in the same place on immigration. But, you know, immigration is a classic example of something that is set by national policy. And so having the right national leader is absolutely essential. You know, Scott, Annise aren't going to set immigration policy for the United States. It's going to be set by the president and by Congress. And unless you have a Congress and unless you have a president who understands that immigration has been a good thing for our country and that we should be treating people with respect, then we're not going to make the progress we need to make. And for cities to succeed, healthcare, immigration, transportation, you need the right federal leaders. So I do like to think if mayors ruled the world, but we don't. And big national decisions are being made at the federal level that affect our cities, that affect the quality of life of Americans every day, and you need the right people making those decisions.
So how does the battle at the top of the ballot affect the races down at the bottom? Mayor Parker, you had mentioned that in Texas, that you can flip a switch and just vote party lines and get out of there and get back to whatever you were doing on your way home. But who else is on that ballot? It's not just politicians.
Well, yeah, by definition, they're all politicians.
Oh, it's not just. I guess I mean not just legislators. How's that? They're all public servants,
but they're also politicians because they're on the ballot.
That's true.
If it is, we've been talking about the Donald Trump phenomenon, and he breaks every rule of politics. He takes this side, and then he takes that side. His positions have changed. He has huge following among the Tea Party and even in the evangelical community, even though he regularly violates all of the tenets that they say they stand for. So we just keep watching this phenomenon happen across the country, and he's bringing new people into the political process. But if they had to pick their way down the ballot, would they flip all the switches all the way down, or punch the stylus, or whatever type of voting you have? In Texas, you're correct. You can go in and you vote Republican, or you can vote Democratic, and all of the candidates have been selected. So a few seconds, you're out the door again. And in states like ours, we expect to see first-time voters who really don't give a rip about the local elections casting votes about which they know nothing. Other states don't have that straight ticket poll, and it may have a different impact. But always in a presidential election, it's the highest turnout elections that we have across the United States. It will have an impact all the way down. And if there is and depending which party is in ascendancy, there are unlike the legislative seats, which have been gerrymandered into either safe Republican or Democratic seats. A lot of local level, county level seats, some cities are on the partisan ballot. Most of us are not, but it'll sweep in the old and sweep out the new. In Houston, the biggest problem, or in Texas, the biggest problem is that we elect all our judges on a partisan ballot. And so you have really great jurists who they happen to be on the Democratic ticket. They get swept out in a Republican year. 2 years later, it's a Democratic year. The other side gets swept out, and that is not justice. But since I have, just for a moment, I want to come back. Scott's. I got you better, Scott. We do tablets. We have an emergency physician back in the headquarters, and the EMT comes and they stabilize and they discover that someone doesn't need a transport. We put them on. So even the fire trucks all have them. They have a tablet. The emergency room doc has that conversation. We give them taxi vouchers if they just need to go pick up a prescription or get to a clinic.
Creative
it's
solutions.
Very
telemedicine,
similar.
yeah.
Telemedicine on a laptop or tablet computer. If you Google the Ethan Project in Houston, we used our 1115 Medicaid waiver money like social impact bonds. Same idea. We used 1115 Medicaid waiver to fund it, and we hope to see it spread across the United States.
And you're seeing those kind of innovative solutions, and they will differ by community, but what they are is they are focused on healthcare delivery. How do we get healthcare in the most efficient, effective, way that we possibly can. And that's what's exciting. And you see that happening in cities and towns and places that aren't mandated by the federal government and won't be, because they're unique to what you have in Houston. Houston has a different medical asset base than Mesa, Arizona does. And so what you do is that we adapt to what we're strong in. That's what I love about cities. And getting back to your question on the ticket, I don't know that anyone really knows how that's going to impact. Let's assume that Donald Trump is not like any other politician because he has no natural following or base. As Annise said, it comes from people in areas that you would never expect, and people that absolutely you'd say, yeah, I know why he or she is a Trump follower. And so he's brought out different kinds of voters who may or may not care, understand, or have any interest in down ticket. It's not like it's a movement that people are all of a sudden following, which I think would have a very direct impact. Somebody who comes up and says, I'm not going to vote for any Republican because the Republicans nominated Donald Trump, they weren't going to vote for Republicans anyway. I mean, they've already decided. I think that what the unknown is, and what Republicans are afraid of, is that people will care only about the top and completely ignore what's below. Or I know a lot of Republicans who now have said, I'm checked out, I'm gone, because I can't handle either Donald Trump and what he represents or Ted Cruz and what he represents. I'm checked out. That's what I think scares most Republicans, is that independents who would normally be deeply involved, or even Republicans, will stay home. We know to a degree that phenomena happened with Mitt Romney. A lot of evangelicals stayed home. They checked out. Well, that was a vote for Barack Obama. I mean, people don't think that way, but that's how it works. And so in that case, I think it could have an impact on down ticket. I don't think anybody has any clue as to really what that is, and they can run all the polls in the world. That's not something I think you can really pull, because I don't think people, first of all, would be honest in saying, yeah, I ignore everything else except for the presidency. The other thing, I don't know that people really know themselves how they will respond, because there's still a lot to be played out, and we may have a completely different environment in November than we do today. We simply don't know.
This race has really been.
I mean, the things that we're getting all excited about now, by the time you get through the conventions and all of a sudden we get into one-on-one, whoever it is, there will be in a weird way, a sense of normalcy that will come out, and you'll see a somewhat more traditional. I don't have I'm not crazy enough to think it's going to be the same old, same old. This is not going to be 2008, 2012, but it's not going to be as crazy as it is right now. And so I don't think anyone really knows how it'll impact down the ticket.
Mayor Dean, what do you think?
Just talking about Tennessee, I mean, I think if Trump or Cruz, and it's hard to predict because everybody's been wrong in their predictions this year, but I would assume that would be a bad year for the Republicans at the national level, either one of those candidates. I don't think it would result in Republicans losing congressional seats in Tennessee. I don't think that would happen. I don't think it would change the mix, but I think it does have an influence, whether either or Trump or Cruz, I think, will be determinative potentially of who controls the Senate. I think there's a lot of Northeastern, Midwestern, Western senators who are on the edge, and that would just be one more thing. People thinking that the government's going to be unmanageable, shut down again. Ted Cruz closing it down to read eggs and ham. That would have a detrimental effect on the Republican Party. Having a divided party and having a party that is staked out sort of an extreme is never a formula for success.
I think we have a few minutes left, so I'd love to open it up to audience questions if anyone has any. Yes. There's a mic coming.
Hi. Many people have observed that major progressive changes like marriage equality and civil rights happen in generational waves, and I think that a lot of other people have noticed that this election cycle, there's been a bit of a generational wave in the Democratic Party. I wonder if you three politicians could comment. A group of us here just returned from a national conference for single-payer health care in Nashville, and it feels like Sanders' support among the young points to single-payer health care as the next major progressive agenda to hit the mainstream. I'd love to get your opinion.
Well, I'll go first since you were in Nashville, but I don't know whether that'll be the next big issue. I think right now, I think with health care, it's holding on to what we got. And I think obviously there are improvements that can be made, but just seeing what President Obama went through when he was elected with a sizable majority in the Senate and recaptured the House, and how difficult that was to get done and the compromises that were made to get that done. I don't see a scenario where the Democrats take the House. I can see a scenario where they take the Senate, but I would be reluctant to predict that there'll be dramatic domestic legislation like that if the Democrat wins the presidency.
I think we agree.
Okay.
Yeah. And I think the interesting thing is going to be how millennials grow up, how you as voters. We saw, for those of us who grew up in the 60s and the craziness that happened then, a lot of those 60s revolutionaries ended up being Reagan Republicans, and were the backbone to the to Republican as they became the so-called soccer moms and everything. But this is a different world. My kids grew up in a world that, for the most part, was very accepting, was very, even though the problems we have, and we do have problems in race and gender and all that kind of stuff, but my kids grew up in a very different world than I grew up in, and they're much more accepting and willing to accept those ideas. But they also have different views on government, and they have a distrust for government, hence I think the Bernie, fill in the burn, and even the Trump phenomena. They have a distrust for institutions. So it's a combination we have never seen. And I think the real question going forward is as old white guys die off, as we're talking about, and this, the tail end of the baby boom, and you get into the others move up, I don't think anyone knows what they will grow into. We do know they'll be more accepting. Things like gay marriage, now it's North Carolina, things like that, it's an issue. My guess that in 2 election cycles, that won't even be a discussion. It'll just be gone. And that's how much we will have evolved. That's a good thing. How that plays out in the more traditional definition of the parties and conservative versus liberal, that's going to be one of the fascinating things, I think, to see is how the Bernie generation now grows into in 5, 10, 15 years once they start having families and what they'll do. We know it'll be different. We know it won't fit into the traditional Republican mode. That's for dang sure. That's our biggest threat is the change in demographics. Even urban Republicans tend to have much different views than rural Republicans do. That's a big challenge for Republicans. We're becoming a much more urbanized society. And urbanization calls for cooperative efforts. And a rural Republican is very individualistic. And that's the biggest change that you're going to see as we evolve more and more through the millennials who have grown up in an integrated society, an accepting society, and that, even though we're not there, we're in a much different place than we were when I was growing up and any of us were growing up. So that'll be fascinating.
We have a question from over here.
I think you already kind of touched upon this, but one issue that is in the vogue right now that you all specifically highlighted is how much innovation is possible at the state level, and that brings to mind obviously the
City level.
city level. Sorry, forgive me. And that brings to mind obviously the North Carolina's bathroom bill, which is really an anti-workers bill also, because it prevents state from setting a wage limit, among other things. So the public health implications of that are also fairly clear. But here is a city trying to pass a bill, but you have a state that is doing its best to thwart their progressivism or innovation, so to speak. So I would just like to get your comments on that.
First, I was the first openly gay or lesbian mayor of a major American city. Lots of folks made a big deal about it, but I was very clear that I was the mayor of Houston first and foremost, and I focused on that. But in 2014, the city of Houston passed not a bathroom bill, not a sexual orientation or gender identity non-discrimination ordinance. We actually passed a comprehensive non-discrimination ordinance because we didn't have one for anybody, and it got repealed in November. Do the same kind of rhetoric and tactics that were used by the North Carolina legislature. One of the reasons that happened in Houston, the city that elected me citywide 9 times, is that it was the first thing out of the chute after the equal marriage ruling. and all the sort of right-wing attention focused on that. But the other thing was that it targeted the transgender community, which is unlike I was a lesbian activist in the 1970s, and we've spent 45 years showing our face to the world. For the transgender community, it's been a relatively short period of time, and the hearts and minds connection hasn't been made yet. It will. Like, as Scott said, this is the problem that happened in Houston with our election. The average age of voters was 68. Mm-hmm. This is an issue that somebody under 30 doesn't care about. Somebody under 50 is probably going to vote where I would think is the right way, and somebody over 50 is still struggling with it. This is a war that demographics has already won. But if young people don't show up and vote, that's the result you get. Now, let me go from there to when Greg Abbott came in as as governor of Texas, and let me say that I was really surprised that Greg Abbott could make Rick Perry look like a statesman. In his inaugural speech, he targeted local control in cities. And he said, I want to do away with things like plastic bag bans and tree protection ordinances and non-discrimination ordinances. And he named off a whole bunch of other things that cities had done, progressive cities in Texas. For whatever reason, he didn't like them. And now, he was unsuccessful in the legislature in doing that. But it's the same thing that North Carolina has just done. The cities are moving faster and farther than our legislatures in red states know how to handle. And instead of trying to figure out how to work together on things that really matter, immigration or infrastructure, all the other things that we've talked about, they have focused on feel-good things or red meat items to try to appease the party.
Well, here's the other phenomena. You look at every survey. I think Congress is what? Are they in double digits now? Approval? They might be at 11%.
Yeah, like
State legislators are barely at 20%. Most city councils have very high acceptance rate. People like their cities for the most part. They trust their cities. Voters act really differently when they're electing a city council than they do when they're electing state legislators. And Mesa is a great example. As we said, it's the most conservative big city in America, Tea Party central, and yet a Tea Party member has a very difficult time getting elected to the Mesa City Council, thank heavens. And when they do get elected, we've had about 3 or 4 of them. They last one term, then they're very quietly and expeditiously discharged. And yet that same electorate. Last time we had a Tea Party candidate run against a moderate, mainstream Republican, and it was 70-30. I mean, they barely registered a blip. And yet that same electorate consistently elects Tea Party legislators who couldn't get elected to the city council, but they have no problem. And the reason being is the way partisan elections happen. In Mesa, our election in a lot of areas, and this happens in Congress too, is determined in the partisan primary, not in the general election. And so we tend to elect the hyper-partisan to state legislatures. And when most cities, it's either most cities in America have either nonpartisan elections or they're open elections where party isn't as important as problem solving. So the voters, until they start voting consistently, they seem to elect problem solvers as city council members and mayors, and they elect very partisan people as legislators. It's going to be a disconnect. Mm-hmm. And there's always this power struggle. As Karl talked about, legislatures hate it when city councils are independent. And what you'll usually find is when the legislature passes a law to override a city council, it's not a legislator from that city. It's usually a legislator from a small town in the upper corner of the state that has nothing to do with Houston or Nashville or Mesa. They're as far away as possible, but guess what? They can run a bill, and the rest of the state puts the city in their place. And that happens. In Arizona this year, the legislature has declared war on city councils, and it's for discrimination laws, it's for plastic bags, it's the whole thing. So, the electorate in America is really strange. They love their cities, they're protective of their cities, and for the most part, they elect problem solvers, but they have a very different way of acting when it comes to state and federal legislators.
Cities are service organizations.
Right.
And you have to have service-minded people to run them. We elected a Tea Party council member, and we used to make a joke because she voted no on everything. So it was Councilmember Brown voting no, and so we just abbreviated it, TBVN. And but she voted against. She was consistent. She voted against all federal grants coming to Houston, even if it was for projects or items to go into her district. And we said, but it doesn't mean that if you vote against this federal grant, it doesn't mean that it goes back to the taxpayers. It just goes to some other city. It's the principle. Some of us have to stand up. One term and she was out because her district wanted that fire station and wanted those ambulances.
That's it. We have time for one more question. So many. Yes. Go ahead, Harold. Sure.
1.5 more questions.
1.5 more questions. I see
Yeah,
another.
yeah.
I see another behind you.
So
We don't want to
any-
leave anyone brokenhearted back
That's
there.
right.
Yeah, no, not in this room. So anytime anyone has made any predictions about the election, they've been about what's happening, they've been wrong. I'm wondering if any of you
So
are
we're not going to
willing.
go out on that limb.
No idea.
But I'm wondering if you will go out on that limb and if you have a prediction for what's going to happen.
I think Hillary Clinton's going to be the next president of the United States because it's going to be either Ted Cruz or Donald Trump on the other side.
Anyone else want to hazard a guess?
I'm-
I'm waiting for July. I've got a couple conventions
obviously,
coming up.
With the caveat that everybody's been wrong for about 7 or 8 months, I'd say I agree. I think it's, remember the Republicans came out of the last election saying what they had to do in the next 4 years was to get a tie with Hispanic Americans because of a growing voting bloc, repair the relationship with women, and they have failed pretty miserably at that. And then I also think, and this is on a positive note, that I think a Democrat can say, if you look back 8 years and ask yourself, are you better off now than where you were 8 years ago? Most Americans would say they're better off. And so I think Hillary Clinton will be the next president.
I can't make a prediction because there's never been a time in history where all 4 potential candidates have higher unfavorable ratings
Yes,
than favorable
it's
ratings.
true.
Every candidate has a major flaw or litany of flaws that, and when they're that negative, and they're not ideological in most part. It is character with and trustworthiness with Hillary. It's Bernie and whatever universe he's in. It's Donald for being Donald, and it's Ted Cruz for he's just not likable and where he stands. Those are huge, huge issues, and I have no idea how that plays against each other. If Ted Cruz runs against Hillary, it's who do I hate least?
Yep.
And that to me is a huge unknown, and I think a lot of it has to do with what the economy does. If we see an upswing in jobs, I don't care what it is, it's hard to be the opposing party in good economic or better economic times. I don't think anyone would say it's good, but it's better. On the other hand, with those kind of unfavorables, and people really don't like any of the candidates that much, it's not that they don't accept them, it's that they're just not passionate about most of them unless you're with a Bernie or a Ted, and those subgroups aren't going to elect them. I don't know what'll happen. So I can't predict, because I don't even know.
We just have 2 minutes left, but I think I saw a question back here.
Thank you again for being here today. My name is Catherine Etman, and I'm wondering about pipeline. Is there a strategy or a system in place to prepare young people to be the future civic leaders of the country, be it through mentorship or training and preparation, either at the city or state or federal level?
There are all sorts of programs for that. In fact, I'm now a fellow at the Institute of Politics. I'm done with my classes, but Scott was a fellow last week, so the Institute of Politics at Harvard is trying that. There are a number of now institutions of higher learning across America that have some version of an Institute of Politics where they really try to get their students engaged in government. But I'm going to say something else, and that is that I run into young people all the time who say, I want to be in office someday. And I say, so? What I want to hear from somebody is, this is what I want to do, and I want to run for office because I think this is where I can make the most impact on what I want to do. So I'm just as interested in young people getting involved in their communities, in volunteering, in doing Teach for America, and doing any of 1,000 things that they are passionate about, and get some experience in that, and then turn their sights to office once they've lived a little and figured out where they want to put their energy.
And I would agree with Annise, but I'd also like to put a plug in for working with your city government. I think most people have no idea, young people especially. It's easy, even at Harvard, for example, it's so federally focused that they don't realize that I think the best and most interesting opportunities are in your cities. That's, Boston is a great example through Mayor Menino and now through Mayor Walsh. The things that they're doing in this city to create innovation, to create opportunity, to solve problems. It's like a candy store for a young person, but I think it's overlooked. Look to your city, look for opportunities. Go work for that council member. Go work in that department. You'll never be bored. I'll guarantee you that. Working in the city, because we are service oriented and we're involved in so many different things. But I think you'll be pleasantly surprised how rewarding it is to help change people's lives. And at the city level, you experience that on a daily basis.
Martine, anything
Yeah,
to
I
add?
think they said it all. Just get involved. There are many nonprofits, businesses, and government that you can get involved in.
Great. Well, we're out of time. Thank you all for attending. Thank you for being here.